public criticism of forced agricultural policy.
In this segment, we will examine the decline of Tongil-type rice in South Korea, focusing on the public backlash against the coercive agricultural policies, the devastating impact of the 1980 cold wave on rice production, and the government's subsequent shift toward rice imports. Although the Yushin regime has ended, the direction of political power and the contours of the new system remained unclear until the agricultural season of 1980. Kim In-hwan retained his position as the director of the RDA until the end of May 1980. Consequently, the government and semi-government organizations continued to promote the cultivation of new rice varieties. In April, as the planting season began, the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries secured a substantial 2.7 billion won in incentives for increased food production, announcing that financial rewards would be prioritized for districts with higher adoption rates of the new varieties. Resistance against these policies targeted at local agricultural extension offices, which denied to support farmers cultivating traditional rice varieties. However, farmers who had gained some degree of freedom from prolonged political repression were reluctant to adopt the new varieties. The press, now liberated from the Yushin regime's control, sided with the farmers, publishing critical reports on the coercive agricultural policy. On March 20th, Joseonilbo reported farmers' distrust of the new varieties, quoting those in Gyeonggi province who argued that they could no longer sustain deficit farming simply to satisfy the ambitions of certain officials responsible for developing these varieties, which apparently referred to the RDA head Kim In-hwan. Following Kim's resignation on June 1, 1980, Joseonilbo published another report on June 7th comparing production costs between new and traditional rice varieties. The analysis revealed that farmers growing the newly introduced varieties were incurring an average loss of approximately 19,000 won per danbo. Dongailbo also allowed the farmers to voice their discontent by publishing letters to the editor that criticized the forced cultivation of new rice varieties.
The cold wave and poor harvest of 1980.
Amidst this atmosphere, the cultivation area of Tongil-type varieties in 1980 shrank to around 600,000 hectares, slightly below the half of the total rice cultivation area. Furthermore, the leading variety in terms of cultivation area shifted back to the Japonica strain Milyang 15 or Nakdong rice. Milyang 30, another relief pitcher from the Team Tongil, ranked second, while Akibare followed in third place. Unfortunately again, however, 1980 turned out to be the worst year for Tongil-type varieties. This time, the problem was not pests, but abnormally low temperatures. The summer of 1980 recorded some of the lowest seasonal temperatures since meteorological observations began in East Asia. The overall low temperatures and insufficient sunlight caused approximately 2/3 of South Korean rice paddies to suffer from cold weather damage. Furthermore, just before harvest, heavy rainfall in the southern regions submerged 36,000 hectares of farmland, and hailstorms damaged crops in several areas. Compounding these challenges, a severe outbreak of rice blast disease occurred during the harvest period. While the extreme cold significantly reduced the yields across all rice varieties, the Tongil-type strains were particularly devastated. Milyang 30, a variety newly distributed on a large scale, had a strong resistance to pests, but was highly vulnerable to cold weather. The 1980 cold wave severely affected this variety, making it the third consecutive year in which newly introduced varieties suffered extensive damage. In many fields, rice plants failed to bear mature grains and remained upright instead of bending under their weight, earning them the derisive nicknames such as Yangban rice because they did not bow their heads even in the harvest season. In severely affected coastal and mountainous regions, some farmers just abandoned harvesting altogether. As a result, rice yields in 1980 dropped sharply compared to the previous year. The per danbo yield for Japonica rice varieties fell to 292 kg, while that of Tongil type varieties declined to 287 kg. For the first time since its introduction, the Tongil type rice yield fell below that of Japonica varieties. Overall, total rice production plummeted by 36% compared to the previous year and by an astonishing 41% compared to 1977 when the so-called Green Revolution had been declared a success.
Agricultural policy in confusion and rice imports.
The continuous decline in total rice production from 1978 to 1980 meant that South Korea could not maintain the self-sufficiency in rice it had briefly achieved in 1977. To address the imminent rice shortage, the government urgently sought sources for rice imports. As early as September, concerns over a poor harvest led to a nationwide surge in rice prices. The price of a kama, an 80-kilogram sack of popular Japonica rice, soared by approximately 20% within a month. Even 정부미, or Tongil rice purchased by the government in the previous season, saw a price increase of 27.5% between August and December. Despite the government's intervention of stockpiled rice into the market between October and December, prices remained volatile. Eventually, the government resorted to importing an unprecedented 2.2 million tons of rice, equivalent to roughly 15 million sok, or one-third of the total domestic rice production in 1977. Although 1980 was a year of extreme poor harvest, the imported volume far exceeded South Korea's immediate needs due to the rigidity of agricultural market. Unlike industrial goods, agricultural production and consumption do not fluctuate drastically, and contracts tend to be long-term and stable. The global grain trade operates within a tightly interconnected network, making it difficult to secure large quantities on short notice. In such cases, as seen in Korea in 1980, buyers often face unfavorable conditions, such as paying above market prices or committing to future purchases beyond their immediate needs. Indeed, the rice imports of 1980 were not a one-time transaction. They were tied to contracts extending through 1983, ultimately totaling around 3 million tons. The excessive importation of foreign rice later disrupted the domestic rice market in the early 1980s and became a significant financial burden on government resources.
The new military regime's abandonment of Tongil-type rice.
Seeking both to alleviate financial strain and gain the support of farmers, the new military regime signals its intention to abandon the coercive agricultural policy which still remained controversial. After seizing power through a coup and a violent crackdown on civilians, Chun Doo-hwan was inaugurated as president through elections orchestrated by his own regime. On September 29, 1980, Chun participated in a rice harvesting event in Gimpo, Gyeonggi Province alongside the Blue House staff. During the event, he indirectly criticized the previous administration's rice policies, stating that new rice varieties were often developed and tested in tropical countries like the Philippines before being introduced in Korea, leading to frequent failures. He further emphasized that agriculture followed long-standing traditions and could not be abruptly changed at the government's behest. Although the Chun administration formally proclaimed the right of farmers to choose their own rice varieties, it simultaneously implemented measures to, in effect, suppress the cultivation of Tongil-type varieties. The government reduced the purchase volume of Tongil-type rice, removed some previously encouraged varieties from the list of recommended strains. As a result, the cultivated area of Tongil-type rice steadily declined, and research on its development within the RDA also diminished. Conversely, research on Japonica varieties, which had been stagnant, regained momentum, particularly after the 1980 cold wave. As research and policies supporting the cultivation of Tongil-type rice varieties diminished, their cultivation area steadily declined. By 1981, the total area of Tongil-type rice fields had plummeted to just over half of the 1980 level, covering around a quarter of the total rice cultivation area. Although minor fluctuations occurred in 1982, the downward trend continued, and by 1991, the cultivation area had fallen below 50,000 hectares. This marked, in effect, the disappearance of Tongil-type rice from Korean agriculture.
The legacy of the Korean Green Revolution.
By the late 1970s, accumulating farmer dissatisfaction and policy shift began to erode the sustainability of Korea's agricultural expansion. Government-imposed high-yield farming practices turned increasingly coercive, sparking rural resistance. The contradictions inherent in this green revolution ultimately culminated in policy failures by the decade's end. Nonetheless, its impact on South Korean agriculture was profound. The Green Revolution catalyzed major development in agricultural research, infrastructure, and policy making. Even lessons from the failure of high-yielding varieties influenced the subsequent agricultural strategies, emphasizing genetic diversity, environmental adaptability, and farmer autonomy. The legacy of the Korean Green Revolution endures not only in its successes, but also in the lessons it imparted regarding the risks of state-driven agricultural interventions and the importance of farmer-centered policymaking. Specifically, for agricultural researchers, the Tongil rice stood as a symbolic testament to Korean agricultural science achieving independence from Japanese influence. Although Japanese researchers were initially skeptical of Muneho's hybridization experiments between Indica and Japonica varieties at Iri, they ultimately expressed both surprise and respect when Tongil rice was successfully commercialized and drove Korea's revolutionary increase in rice production. Building on this foundation, Korean agricultural science achieved numerous independent breakthroughs in the 1980s, elevating the nation to a position where it could provide agricultural scientific and technological support to other Asian developing countries pursuing their own green revolutions.